Hello and thanks for joining us. Coming up on today's show. A wannabe art monster. Her first novel, Spill, Simmer, Falter Wither, wowed readers and critics, so much so that she said she was terrified about publishing another. Nevertheless, she has, and it's called A Line Made in Walking. She's in Paris as her debut has been translated into French. Let's meet Irish writer and artist, Sara Baume. Sara, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Now, we're going to start with the tragic news that the Irish rock star Dolores O'Riordan from the Cranberries died this week. Now, Sara, she was the voice of a generation in Ireland, wasn't she?
Yes, yeah, certainly. She had a big impact on the music scene. And I know it will be massive news at home at the moment.
Well, we're going to find out some more about her career now with Solange Mougin.
It was this song that got Dolores O'Riordan hired as a member of the band. An ode to teenage heartbreak, Linger would catapult the Cranberries and the Irish singer into worldwide stardom in 1993. A stroke of incredible luck for the small Limerick indie pop group, even if O'Riordan told France 24 that she didn't realise that at the time.
I was so naive that I didn't realise how many bands there were, first of all, on the planet. Yeah. And when we got hugely famous, I used to think, oh, this happens to everybody. But it wasn't until later, when I got older, that I realised that we were actually really blessed and fortunate to have the massive global success that, you know, we had at such an early age and stuff.
The Irish singer's sultry voice helped the Cranberries sell some 40 million albums. After a 6-year hiatus, the group rejoined forces in 2009 and continued recording until O'Riordan's death Monday in a London hotel at the age of 46. The singer cancelled a tour last year due to back pain and was vocal about suffering from depression and bipolar disorder. A member of the Catholic Church, she was known for her conservative political views, but also for promoting peace, like in the Cranberries' #1 single, Zombie, a politically controversial song about the Troubles.
We heard there that Dolores suffered from bipolar disorder. Your new book, A Line Made by Walking, explores mental illness as well. It's a portrait of a young artist's breakdown in rural Ireland. She's very paranoid. She spends hours fighting tears every day. The doctors say she's depressed. She refuses to take antidepressants. I just wondered, while writing the book, did you work out the difference between being clinically depressed, real mental illness, and just unhappiness?
Well, part of writing the book, I think, was working those things out. Both of the novels kind of deal with the idea of going back to nature and finding redemption in nature in some way. And in Frankie's case, Frankie is the protagonist and the narrator of the second novel. She was very much a version of me at 25, and the book was based on this period of time that I spent living in my grandmother's bungalow. My grandmother died about 3 years previous, and the bungalow was on the market, and it was this kind of lost phase in my life that I think a lot of people suffer from around sort of mid-20s, the so-called quarter-life crisis. But this idea that we're a generation that expects so much from life and are inevitably disappointed because at the end of the day, most people are average. That's what average means, and that this gets misconstrued a lot of the time as depression, whereas in fact it's just, you know, very normal lostness and disillusion. So that's something that I wanted to explore.
And tell us about this interest in loners, because your first book, Spill, Simmer, Falter Wither, was a huge success, but it also focused on an older man in his 50s and his relationship with his one-eyed dog. This character, Frankie's also a loner. What is it about loners?
What is it about loners? There's a lot of them in Irish fiction. When you think of like Malloy or you know, Leopold Bloom, even there's a great tradition. And I actually read that summer when I was in my grandmother's. I remember reading the Stranger or The Outsiders by Albert Camus, and Dangling Man by Saul Bellow, Hunger by Knut Hamsun. These kind of something drew me to these books about lonely people sort of suspended in a certain parcel of time. And Spill Simmer I call my monologue to dogs. So the entire novel is written from the point of view of a man speaking to his dog. And even though it's a 57-year-old man and I was a sort of a 28, 29-year-old woman writing it, I I really, speaking to the dog was what connected us. It made total sense to me that that while I was in a way sort of an outsider in a small community, obviously not to any of the same extent that Ray, my protagonist, would have been, but I wanted him to be an extremity of those feelings of isolation. And the best way of channeling that was to talk to the dog, because I was talking to my dog as well.
And I mean, it's just been translated into French. It was a huge success in the English-speaking world. Why do you think that was?
It still baffles me because when I first wrote it, I thought, I didn't even think it would get published, and I sent it out to just a very small few publishers, and it was picked up by a brilliant Irish press called Tramp, and they made a big success of it at home, and then it, continued to get interest overseas and sold on, and I began to realize, I suppose, that when you write something very personal, so long as you remain completely authentic to that experience, that's the only way that people can understand it. That if I tried to write something that I thought would make a great novel or would sell to lots of people, it inevitably would have failed. That only really by writing something just for myself did it translate, in a figurative sense.
Going back to your new book, tell us about the photographs of dead animals and birds that we see in it.
It's funny, just yesterday I get dead animal fan mail now. So in the second novel, there are a series of photographs interspersed in the text, and each chapter is named for an animal. And it's about a project that the protagonist, Frankie, conducts over the course of the summer that she lives in her grandmother's bungalow. She takes photographs of dead animals that she finds, and she suddenly seems to find them everywhere. Suddenly it's as if they're falling from the sky. And I kind of wanted to focus on this idea that she feels as though everything is ending. She's depressed. She feels like her world is ending in tiny increments, and that the animals are sort of a symbol of this.
You actually took them, didn't you, the photos?
I did, but I took them sort of over the course of several years. So never, she takes them over the course of the summer and notices them everywhere. But yeah, I'm a big fan of the German writer W.G. Sebald, and he would use found images and just place them in the text with no explanation. And my inclusion of the images was kind of a nod to him and that sort of slightly enigmatic way of including suggestions, visual suggestions.
And before A Line Made by Walking was published, you lost your father. Mm-hmm. And you said the father in the book is your own dad. How did his death affect the way you saw the book afterwards?
It was strange because the book was very much a sort of a love song to my grandmother in a way, and I was interested in the relationship between grandchildren and grandparents that doesn't get the same kind of focus as parents and children, and yet I had this very strong connection to my maternal grandmother, and she was the one who passed on books and who we would always talk about reading, and it was having it, and yet at the same time I was writing about how the death of a loved one had affected me without any way of knowing that by the time it was actually published my father would have died, someone much closer to me. But it's funny, I don't think I could write about that. I haven't written anything about my dad apart from what already went in the book, which everyone loves because it's a pretty close, most of the characters are fictional, but in the case of Dad, who didn't read, and I guess because I knew that he was never going to encounter it himself in text, then I could write what I wanted about him. So he's quite true. He's very much my dad in the novel. So I'm glad it's in there now.
And I wanted to go back to how you started out. You actually studied art, and you still do art now. You worked in an art gallery, and when you sort of had this calling to write. Tell us about that.
It felt quite natural. I started writing. I was working in art galleries, as many people do after art school, because it's hard to get studio space and opportunities. And then I started writing about art criticism, I suppose, reviews and stuff. And then I kind of thought, well, what I love to read is fiction. So why don't I try writing fiction? And it sort of worked out for me. It just sort of fell into place, and I pursued it. But I still make things consistently, and
well, tell us about this ambition to be an art monster that I read about. What was that?
I said that in a Guardian interview, and it's followed me around. Always the thing you wish you hadn't said, like, it comes back to bite you. But I think, I always wanted to be a sort of superstar art monster, and just desperately wanted to succeed, and was less interested in the actual process of making things. And it's only as, I suppose, as I failed and failed again, and as my life became very small and quiet, that I actually started to just make things and write things as a form of therapy, I suppose.
Well, we always finish the show with our guests' cultural pick. And what have you chosen for us today?
I've chosen, because it's easy enough to get to from Paris, Rose Wiley, an exhibition called Quack Quack, which is in the Serpentine Sackler Galleries at the moment. And Rose was an artist I encountered a couple of years ago, the gallery that I used to work in. I wrote an essay for them. And it was interesting because I started out art writing, and then this was an exercise in art writing after I'd been writing fiction for a number of years. So I wrote this essay that was sort of like a love letter to the artist. And she's the most wonderful person, but her paintings are so free. They look quite primitive, but their influence is everything from sort of celebrity news and comic books to Renaissance art and medieval and Greek mythology. And so she has all of these references in there. And Rose is an artist who only came to prominence in her 70s. She's, I think, about 83 now. And there's a lesson in that for everyone.
There certainly is. Sara, thank you so much for coming in and speaking to us. And Rose Wiley's exhibition Quack Quack is on at the Serpentine Galleries until February. Sara's book Spill, Simmer, Falter Wither has just been translated into French, and A Line Made by Walking is available in English. Remember our website. We're also on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. There's more news coming up on France 24 after this.